Alright boys, Bettrmma is back. We are coming at you guys with UFC Fight Night, Manyan Fiorot versus Aaron Blanchfield, recap and breakdown of the card. There was a lot of great fights on this card. More importantly, there were some interesting underlying storylines that we're going to have to address. There actually was a few dramatic storylines, so we've got a lot to get into. Angel Pacheco versus Lochran. One major thing that I noticed out of Lochran in this fight was that, yes, he is very aggressive and he does throw good boxing combinations on the feet in terms of the technical speed that he shows in his punches. He has a very good 1-2-3. He's got some good punching combinations, but he's extremely stiff in terms of his spine. So he has a lack of head movement. His head is always straight up in the air, and as Pacheco exposed, it's very easy to hit him, and especially easy to hit him when he is throwing shots himself. It's very easy to counter Lochran. I think it's a decent matchup just to give Raul Rosas a decent prospect to build his name off of. So, yeah, why not? Lochran versus Raul Rosas. At the end of the day, Lochran may be able to go quite far in the bantamweight division if he continues to develop as a fighter. He has some good grappling base and a good boxing base, but he needs to really improve on his boxing defense, mainly his head movement, moving his head off the center line when he throws his punches. Overall, it was a good performance from Lochran. Got an easy 3-round decision, and we start off the card going 0-1. Andre Petroski versus Jacob Malkoun. Now, there was always the thought that Jacob Malkoun could, of course, win this fight by KO TKO. Not a lot of people were going into this fight thinking that Jacob Malkoun would be submitting Andre Petroski. But to think that Andre Petroski would lose by KO TKO by going for a double leg takedown and somehow hitting his head off of Jacob Malkoun's hip bone. Malkoun followed up with ground and pound shots, and the ref called the fight right there. Petroski, at the end of the day, he just showed why he's not going to be an elite middleweight fighter. I think Petroski's ceiling in the UFC is to be a gatekeeper just outside of the top 15 rankings. Perhaps his ceiling in the UFC will be a 14 or 15 next to his name, but Andre Petroski does not have the IQ to implement a game plan, and that is really what he showed in this fight. For being the stronger wrestler, he shot a takedown with less than a minute to go in the first round. And not only did he wait this long to shoot his first takedown, he showed no feints for the takedown. He didn't fake the takedown. There was nothing to disguise his shot. Not only is it important for your game plan as a wrestler to get your opponent thinking about the takedown, it floods their nervous system. And of course, a lot of people have heard George St. Pierre talk about this, and it's something that Bo Nickel has implemented into his game very well so far. He feints the takedown, so it gives your opponent something to think about immediately off the bat. If Petroski is confident in having a kickboxing exchange and a kickboxing war with Jacob Malkoun, to be feinting the takedown is only going to be opening up opportunities for Malkoun's guard to be lowering because of that threat, and for you to have a greater success at throwing your strikes. So Petroski has the tools to be a great middleweight fighter, but it's not all there in terms of his camp and his coaching, and it's not all there in terms of his IQ. But yeah, Andre Petroski, just keep watching the channel, bro, and maybe you'll learn something. But yeah, Jacob Malkoun was really delusional after the win. He was saying how he's just a level above, even though he actually got clipped at one point by Petroski and he was taken down. But he's saying how he's top 10 in the middleweight division, and that's just like ridiculous. Moving on to Ibo Aslan versus Anton Turkalj. Ibo Aslan's only loss on his record was from Anton Turkalj. Anton Turkalj was able to get the submission win over him. Now, Turkalj is essentially what Forrest Griffin would look like if he was fighting in 2024. Turkalj has the same skill set and head movement, so he can get himself into these really entertaining rock'em sock'em robot, back and forth combinations, and Turkalj ultimately gets clipped consistently throughout the fight as he's rushing in. I mean, Turkalj does these classic 2000 to 2010 UFC moves of just literally running forward and rushing in with punches and getting clipped on the chin as you're running forward. So it's almost comical to see Turkalj doing that in the UFC at this day and age. But it really shows what heart and athleticism can get you in the UFC. But yeah, Turkalj, he's most likely going to get cut. Ibo Aslan was essentially just the harder hitting man throughout the night. You know, Turkalj was aggressive, trying to move in with shots, but at the end of the day, Aslan would just hit him with harder shots, and it was just that one to connect that dropped him at the end. And this was the first of many questionable stoppages on tonight's fight card, and this was really the story of tonight's fight night, was this guy's reffing. Gary Copeland, this guy watched Anton Turkalj get hit with a big shot and drop to the ground. Anton Turkalj drops to the ground on his butt, but he is holding himself up with both of his hands posted up on the floor. So he's essentially got two hands posting himself up, and Ibo Aslan is rushing in, about to hit him with follow-up shots, but the referee jumps in before Ibo Aslan has any opportunity to hit him with follow-up shots or any opportunity for Turkalj to gather himself and to gather his bearings and to get back up to his feet. This Gary Copeland jumps in far too soon, and this was unfortunately the first of many occasions on this card tonight. Dennis Bazooka versus Connor Matthews. Now, I just want to say something really quickly. I know that there was a WMMA fight that was supposed to be scheduled before this fight between some Russian woman and some other woman. And I just want to say something really quickly. To all of the atheists or agnostics out there that often say, oh, if there was a God, you know, what would they do about all the bad things in this world, you know? What would they give to us, you know, if there were so many bad things going on? What would they do about all the horrible things in this world? I just want to say that if you can't see the fact that God canceled this WMMA fight on this UFC fight night, and you can't be grateful for God doing that for us, then you're really choosing to not see God's grace and God's love for us. It's just something to be grateful for, and it's something that should really make you non-believers believe. We do not cover WMMA here, respectfully. Dennis Bazooka versus Connor Matthews. Connor Matthews has some very good straight punches and a very nice teep kick to the body. But Bazooka throws some extremely hard hooks to the body and hooks to the head. As soon as the fight starts, you could see Bazooka setting up these big hooks, and eventually he starts clipping Connor Matthews with these shots as the fight goes on. It's a very competitive, entertaining first round. They're battling jabs and leg kicks. Matthews ends up getting a takedown later into the second round. It was a very close fight for the first two rounds. Then 20 seconds into the round, as Connor Matthews throws a right hook from the southpaw position, it slightly clips Bazooka, but then Bazooka just throws a mean left hook over the top. Seriously hurts Connor Matthews. Bazooka follows up with some heavy shots. Peterson, the referee, who I think has one of the worst stoppages in UFC history in Dominic Cruz versus Henry Cejudo, he had a very, very good referee stoppage here. He let Matthews get dropped, gave him an opportunity to try and recover. He let him eat some shots, and when he saw that Matthews wasn't getting up, he stepped in there and finished off the fight. You know, could you be upset about one or two shots here or there? But let's be real, you'd be more upset if Conor Matthews didn't get a chance to recover. So, good stoppage from referee Keith Peterson. Reffing a stoppage in MMA is genuinely a lot like being a waiter. You let them sit down, then you let them eat. You can tell when they're finished with their food, and then you stop the meal. Checks get written, and everybody goes home happy. But Dennis Bazooka looked really good. He's an Albanian Christian soldier, man. He seems like a really nice guy. I would like to push Bazooka up in the rankings. He throws heavy hands. He's got a decent grappling base. Let's see how far we could push him. Now, moving up to Burns versus Julio Arce. As it turns out, Herbert Burns is genuinely not a UFC level fighter. That's really what he proved to us tonight. In the first round, they're really feeling out each other's range. Julio Arce is throwing these big overhand rights that are backing up Herbert Burns. Burns is essentially trying to look to do the same thing and then back Arce up against the cage and shoot for takedowns, try and get Arce to the ground. Arce does a great job at defending the takedowns, though. Burns keeps on trying to throw these knees in the clinch. Twice he hits Julio Arce in the gonads, and the referee, Gary Copeland, ends up taking a point away from Herbert Burns. I'm genuinely not teed off at all or upset by him taking a point from Herbert Burns. At the end of the day, they do warn you one time after you hit the guy in the gonads. So if you do it a second time really hard, it's the ref's call to see if it's a really hard shot or not and if he's going to take a point. It is the first round, so it is really setting a tone for the rest of the fight. For the condition that the one fighter is going to be in. So I'm not even going to argue it because you got a fair argument to say that they could take a point away from Herbert Burns in that situation. Moving on into the second round, Arce backs up Herbert against the fence, throws a jab, then a big overhand right over the top, seriously clips Herbert Burns, and in that exact moment, you could almost see his eyes looking at the referee as he starts to cover up. It's like that moment after he gets hit with something crazy where his heart of hearts just says, I want to get out of here right now. And so he covers up, doesn't move his feet at all. Horrible body language, just lets Arce tee off on him like a heavy bag. Eventually, Herbert gets hit with a massive hook and gets laid down to the ground. And the ref immediately jumps in, doesn't even give Arce the opportunity to hit him with some follow-up shots. And at the end of the day, I'm not that upset by the stoppage. You could really see that Herbert Burns was done. Would I have liked to seen a couple more shots just to make sure he was done with his meal? Yes, I would have liked to seen it. But you know, you can't win them all. Next up, the real main event of the evening. You know they had to put him on the headliner of the prelims because he always makes you show up. Nate Landwehr versus Jamal Emers. For those that did pick Jamal Emers in this fight, the reason for that was made very clear in about the first 20-30 seconds of the fight when Jamal Emers comes out flying and hits Nate Landwehr with a very, very strong and fast 1-2 combination and drops Nate down to his knees very quickly. Now, he pops right back up, but you could tell that Nate just got rocked and he got buzzed a little bit. It's one of those shots that kind of makes you go, okay, now I'm really in a fight. He gets back up and he starts throwing up his high guard and he starts moving his head and moving his guard. Very Rampage Jackson-esque if you look at Rampage versus Wanderlei Silva when they fought in the UFC. You know, he's rolling off of Jamal Emers' punches. Jamal Emers is trying to hit him with some combinations to get him out of there in the first round with some good hooks around his guard. But Nate Landwehr is able to circle around, use his feet, start popping his jab, and start throwing some jabs and hooks off of Jamal Emers' combinations. So Nate Landwehr, a very seasoned veteran fighter, takes the heat early from Jamal Emers, starts moving his head and countering off of Jamal Emers. Nate starts walking Jamal down with a jab and a front kick. Then throws a very Hamzat Chimaev, Ikram Aliskerov-esque rear hand uppercut, just leaping in, smashes Jamal Emers with this uppercut. Jamal Emers' eyes roll to the back of his head, only takes a few follow-up shots for Nate Landwehr to follow up and get Jamal out of there. Absolutely beautiful performance by Nate Landwehr. I don't think Nate Landwehr is a top 15 fighter in the UFC, but he is a fan favorite. You just have to keep on feeding him these up-and-coming prospects at featherweight that we're trying to test out to see if they are top 15 level. Give them Nate Landwehr beforehand. He's going to test their cardio. He's going to test their toughness. He's going to see if they are just a first-round finisher or if they are a second-round, third-round finisher as well. So Nate Landwehr is a great test for young UFC up-and-comers, and I look forward to seeing more of his fights in the UFC. On the prelim card, we went 3-3 on the prelims. Not too bad. But who cares about picks anyways? We care more about the quality of the fights and what we look forward to moving forward. And we got some entertaining fights out of Nate Landwehr, Julio Ars, and Dennis Bazooka. I mean, all the fights were finishes, so you can't complain about the fights. Moving on to the main card of Chidi Njokuani versus Rhys McKee. Now, this was 100% the worst fight of the night. Chidi Njokuani ended up getting the 3-round decision here. They're both trying to kickbox at range, trade leg kicks, trade punches over the top. Chidi Njokuani was being more successful with the leg kicks. Rhys McKee was trying to hold Chidi Njokuani up against the fence. Really boring fight style out of Rhys McKee. As the fight progressed, Chidi Njokuani started to time him more as Rhys McKee tried to come in with his punches. He was getting clipped on the chin by Chidi and getting messed up in the clinch with knees and elbows. So it was a very easy 3-round decision for Chidi Njokuani. Rhys McKee is a Bellator, PFL, Cage Warriors level fighter. He does not belong in the UFC, and Chidi Njokuani barely does as well. Moving on to Billy Algeo versus Kyle Nelson. Now, again, this was where Mr. Gary Copeland comes into the picture again, unfortunately. Kyle Nelson rushes in against Billy Algeo, starts clipping him early into the first round, flash knockdown on Bill Algeo, but Bill Algeo starts to get his rhythm, gain his distance, pop Kyle Nelson with jabs to the head and body, even hits him with a very nice spinning 360 roundhouse kick that doesn't rock Kyle Nelson hard, but it does land quite flush. So Algeo is getting into his rhythm throughout the fight. Eventually, later into the first round, Kyle Nelson clips Algeo with a big overhand right, gets Algeo on wobbly legs. Algeo is moving, evading on his feet. Kyle Nelson is rushing in with big hooks, and this Gary Copeland has a big problem in terms of getting in the way of the fighters. Even outside of the finishing sequences, if you notice when the fighters would be circling around the cage, he's completely oblivious to when he's close to the fighters. And if you notice specifically in the Bruno Silva-Chris Weidman fight, there are times where Bruno Silva, if he just takes 1 or 2 steps back, if Chris Weidman throws a feint, if Bruno Silva just steps backward, he's going to step right into Gary Copeland because he's actually not moving out of the way of the fighters as they're circling around the cage. So Gary Copeland is way too close to this exchange as Kyle Nelson is throwing these big hooks on Bill Algeo. Now, instead of giving Bill Algeo the room to move his feet and to cut angles or even go for a takedown, he's all up in these guys' face. And as he sees Bill Algeo just go on wobbly legs for a second, he jumps into the middle of the fight. I just felt like the stoppage was far, far too early. Bill Algeo wasn't knocked down. He wasn't out of the fight. He still had an ability to recover. There was no chance he was given to show that he could intelligently defend himself. It was just, oh, you got hit with something that wobbled you. I'm going to call the fight. So absolutely horrible call by Gary Copeland. I never want to see this guy roughing again. And I think it's really messed up that Bill Algeo got taken out of the fight by the referee. It's not like Kyle Nelson took him all the way out of that fight. But moving on to Nursultan Ruziboev versus Cedrikus Dumas. They weren't really able to get into much of a scrap because the fight only lasted about 3 minutes. Nursultan and Cedrikus were working at range, throwing leg kicks, throwing a few shots, light combinations here or there, both being quite tentative of counter shots from the other. You could tell that they were both trying to counter and time the other with a big counter shot and trying to knock them out. So both of them were quite tentative. Essentially, at one point, by the end of the first round, Cedrikus Dumas blitzes in with a combination. Ruziboev puts his hands out and claws Dumas in the face, and he immediately sort of backs up, covers his face. The referee does not recognize this protest whatsoever. So Ruziboev, being the savage he is, he jumps on this dude like he's running his pockets in the street, starts hitting him with these mean uppercuts, drops Dumas to the ground, finishes him off with some ground and pound, and Dumas just does not show any sort of resistance whatsoever. You know, Dumas, I get that you got poked in the eyebrow, but this is MMA. You get fouled sometimes and the ref doesn't see it, and you got to fight through that stuff, and Matt Hughes knows that. So you can complain about it. He said he wants a rematch with Ruziboev, and I don't even think Ruziboev knows how to speak English. So the fact that he said that to him is completely pointless. Cedrikus Dumas should be more concerned about not getting a charge when he's out of camp instead of what Ruziboev is doing. Kind of upset that we didn't get to see that fight play out. Ruziboev did look good, as did Cedrikus Dumas. So, I mean, I would like to see that fight in the future if it could be rebooked. But I don't know. I would like to see Ruziboev moved up the middleweight rankings, see if we could give him somebody exciting. I would really like to see him against somebody like a Joe Pyfer. I think they would like to save somebody like Joe Pyfer from a guy like Ruziboev. The UFC is really on hyping up these up-and-comers and protecting them from each other. Like the Ian Garys and the Rachmanovs, they want to wait until these guys get into the top 5 before they fight each other. I say make these young up-and-comers fight each other now. I would really like to see Ruziboev against somebody like Joe Pyfer. Now, next up, if Nate Landwehr wasn't the fight of the night, this Chris Weidman-Bruno Silva fight was on the verge of being that. Chris Weidman really went out there and showed levels. He shut me up. I was like, Chris Weidman is beat up. He's too old. He's 40 years old now. You know, Bruno Silva is going to show that he's the younger, more fit fighter. Chris Weidman is not going to be able to show his durability over the 3 rounds. And at the end of the day, after watching Chris Weidman in his last performance versus Brad Tavares, it really would make you think Chris Weidman isn't comfortable with throwing leg kicks anymore. In the first round, Chris Weidman was like, nah, that's all I'm doing is throwing kicks. Whether it's kicks to the body, kicks to the head, leg kicks. He was just saying, fuck it. If I got to lose this thing today, that is what it is. So Chris Weidman really went balls to the wall there. He feints Bruno Silva up against the fence, starts teeing off on Bruno Silva, gets the respect from Bruno Silva essentially. Bruno Silva throws some big hooks back. Chris Weidman does a great job of moving his head, evading those big shots, not getting hit with anything. And then he essentially just grabs Bruno Silva up against the fence and gets control time up against the fence. Chris Weidman is literally just holding him up against the fence, kneeing the back of his leg, not even doing anything for 3 straight minutes. I think it's got to be mandatory. At least at 1 minute, you got to be given a warning because that is 20% of this round. You have to think in totality what these guys are really doing in terms of whether they're stalling or whether they're fighting. So round 2 comes along. Silva is showing some good takedown defense, but as Silva is blitzing in, Chris Weidman is starting to clip Silva, and he's starting to time him with shots. Now, these blitzes are the story of the fight, because as he blitzes in, he eats a mean double eye poke from Chris Weidman. And initially, when you're watching the fight, it just looks like Chris puts his hands out there and then throws a check left hook. So it looks like, oh shit, Chris Weidman just hit him with a check left hook. Weidman starts following up with a few shots, and as Bruno Silva is getting up to his knees and starting to stand up, and he's covering himself, intelligently defending himself, he's avoiding most of the damage of the shots. They're hitting his shoulders and his arms. As he's getting up, this referee, Gary Copeland, jumps in and stops the fight. Now, if you just watch these replays, it is so obvious that even though Bruno Silva suffered 2 horrendous eye pokes that are missed by the referee, he is still giving himself a fighting chance, and he is getting himself back up to his feet. And Chris Weidman brought up in his post-fight interview, Chris Weidman himself, he got hit with eye pokes and he has to fight through it as well. So even if we're saying you got to fight through the eye pokes, even if the referee doesn't see it, Bruno Silva is at least getting back up to his feet, and he is giving himself the chance to fight through it. He's not crawled up in a ball like Cedricus Dumas. And even hypothetically, let's say that no eye poke happened in this situation, and the referee genuinely thought that Chris Weidman hit Bruno Silva with a check left hook, which Bruno Silva is still getting back up to his feet, whether he just got rocked or not, intelligently defending himself. The fact that the referee steps in there is absolutely horrendous. But we gotta move on. The last fight of the night. Vicente Luque versus Joaquin Buckley. Now, I picked Joaquin Buckley in this fight, expecting Joaquin Buckley to be able to hit Vicente Luque through his very basic Dutch-style kickboxing guard. I was absolutely blown away by the development in his game that Joaquin Buckley showed in this fight. And I'm going to have to say this off the bat now. The way that the MMA guru is trying to portray the narrative of this fight is so emotionally based, and it is so horrendously biased, and it's actually laughable how he is making such an emotional reaction to this and acting as though it is an objective take. From the get-go of this fight, as I predicted, Vicente Luque is a Dutch-style kickboxer. So what does he do? He likes to find the range, and then he likes to throw a leg kick, a strong jab, and then hook combinations off of your punches. Now, the problem with this is that if Vicente Luque cannot find his jab or his leg kick, or you're not standing in front of him for Vicente to throw his counter hooks, then what does Vicente really have to start his rhythm in the fight? So Joaquin Buckley does an extremely great job of bouncing in and out of the range, avoiding Vicente Luque's leg kicks, avoiding getting caught in Vicente's jab and his two, and not letting Vicente get his gas and his motor going. So as Joaquin Buckley is bouncing out of range, once he bounces back in, he's not bouncing in on a straight line. He's extremely intelligently picking different angles to the left, to the right, throwing different shots from different angles to break through Vicente Luque's guard, showing an extremely mature ability to cut angles and to pick apart Vicente Luque. I mean, I was blown away by the completely different Joaquin Buckley that I was looking at compared to his Kevin Holland fight when he first started fighting in the UFC. So The fact that people like MMA Guru are trying to portray this like this was somehow a fixed fight is absolutely preposterous, because this was the best Joaquin Buckley that we've seen in the UFC so far. As Joaquin Buckley is bouncing into range, he's hitting Vicente Luque with extremely strong body shots, strong shots to the head, and strong kicks to the body from Buckley. Once round 2 starts, his corner starts encouraging him to throw more in combinations. So Buckley starts to let go much more in the second round, showing a very good controlled aggression, letting go in the pocket against Luque, hitting him with clean shots, throwing a very big flying knee, but then regaining his defensive presence so he's not getting too wild. Buckley is ripping through Luque's guard. Luque goes for a desperation takedown. Joaquin Buckley sprawls and defends it absolutely perfectly. So Luque, in desperation, tries to pull guard, and Joaquin Buckley just gets in the perfect position to just start beating down on Vicente Luque with ground and pound shots. He's got heat behind these shots. Is he looking to throw 100% behind all of them? No, because of course there is a logic, something which Roy Nelson understood very well, that if you throw a consistent amount of shots in ground and pound on your opponent in front of the referee, it is the consistent unanswered shots that make the referee want to step in. He was not eating these huge ground and pound shots like this is Anthony Johnson versus Alexander Gustafsson, and Vicente Luque's head is getting snapped back and it's getting bounced off the canvas. He's getting hit with dozens of unanswered ground and pound shots without showing any sort of improvement in his position, so the referee has no choice but to step in. So the fact that you're saying, oh, but Vicente Luque wasn't improving his position because he has a guy raining down shots on top of him. Vicente Luque was simply done in that fight because his game got shut down from the first minute. So it wasn't just a matter of Vicente being out of gas, Vicente having to go for a desperation takedown, having no confidence in his stand-up anymore on the feet with Buckley because he's getting pieced up and hit with shots to the body and the head. It's just ridiculous, the fact that MMA Guru and then all of his fanboys in his chat are just like, oh yeah, it needs to be investigated. But nobody wants to talk about Conor McGregor, Cowboy Cerrone, and how Cowboy Cerrone winked at Conor McGregor in the stare down literally before the fight started. Nobody wants to talk about that. But all in all, like, this was a very dramatic, controversial UFC card. Very interesting fight night in comparison to the last few ones that we've had. But yeah, the last fight night card was the Bite fight night. Now this was the scandalous Gary Coleman referee fight night card. Gary Copeland, I don't know him as a man. You know, I'm sure he's a nice dude, but like, I don't think he's fit to be a UFC referee. He had too many assignments in there. When things started to get really, really in the thick of it, he got too nervous and he would jump in too early. But this is Better MMA. This is the best ASMR on MMA YouTube. We're always giving you the better MMA takes. Thank you everybody who's been watching and supporting the channel. Thank you to all my Rigo heads. You know what I'm saying? All my riggers. You know what I'm saying? Like and subscribe on the video. Comment on the video. This is going to be a channel where Better MMA lives and thrives, baby. So, yeah. Better MMA out. Peace.